June 4th, 1942. Aleutian Islands, Alaska. The Pacific War was still young, but deadly. 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces controlled the skies across vast stretches of the Pacific. The most feared aircraft for American pilots was the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, fast, agile, and seemingly unbeatable. Every encounter with it carried a near-certain risk of death. That morning, the Japanese launched an air raid on Dutch Harbor, a small U.S. installation on Unalaska Island. Among the pilots was 19-year-old Petty Officer First Class Tadayoshi Koga, flying a newly assigned Zero from the aircraft carrier Ryujo. Accompanied by wingmen CPO Makoto Endo and PO Tsuguo Shikata, Koga's mission was simple in theory: bomb the harbor, strafe American positions, and return safely to the carrier. In practice, war rarely goes according to plan. During the attack, Koga engaged in strafing runs, scoring hits on the U.S. Navy's PBY Catalina patrol aircraft. But ground fire from U.S. defenses damaged his Zero. The oil line ruptured, leaving his engine leaking and the aircraft trailing smoke. With a failing engine, Koga faced a critical decision: attempt to return to the carrier over hundreds of miles of open water, or land on a nearby island designated for emergency landings. He chose the latter, Akutan Island, roughly 25 miles east of Dutch Harbor. What Koga did not know was that this emergency landing site was treacherous. Soft tundra and marshy terrain made conventional landings nearly impossible. As he approached, Shikata, flying nearby, misjudged the ground and radioed that it was solid. Trusting this information, Koga attempted a normal landing. The Zero flipped upon contact, landing upside down. The aircraft suffered surprisingly little damage, but Koga was killed instantly, his neck broken on impact. His wingmen, Endo and Shikata, had been ordered to destroy any Zero that fell into Allied hands. Believing Koga had survived, they refrained from strafing the aircraft, leaving it largely intact, an accident that would become one of the most important intelligence coups of World War II. For weeks, the wreck remained untouched, hidden by fog and the isolation of the Aleutians. On July 10, 1942, a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina, piloted by Lieutenant William Bill Thies, spotted the overturned Zero near Broad Bight. Crewman Albert Knack first identified the wreck. Thies circled the site, recording the location, and reported it. The next day, a recovery team arrived. Koga's body was removed and buried near the crash site, and the Zero was carefully extracted from the marsh with heavy lift equipment and transported to Dutch Harbor. The U.S. Navy quickly realized the significance of this find. Here was a fully intact Japanese Zero, an aircraft that had killed countless Allied pilots and dominated early Pacific battles. For the first time, Americans could study it, understand it, and prepare to fight it effectively. It wasn't just a downed plane, it was a treasure trove of intelligence, holding the secrets of Japan's most feared fighter. The Zero was then transported under heavy guard to Naval Air Station North Island, San Diego, arriving in mid-August 1942. Engineers repaired the wings, stabilizers, rudder, landing gear, and propeller. The canopy and flaps were restored, and the aircraft was repainted in U.S. Navy blue-gray over light gull gray with American insignia. The stage was set for test flights, and for the first time, U.S. pilots would confront the Zero not in combat, but in controlled trials where its secrets could be uncovered. The crash of Koga's Zero, a result of a simple misjudgment and the marshy terrain of a remote island, would soon change the trajectory of the Pacific War. It was the moment when a single mistake gave the United States the chance to finally understand and ultimately exploit the weaknesses of an aircraft that had seemed invincible. The story of Koga's Zero had only just begun. August-September 1942. Naval Air Station North Island, San Diego, California. The Zero, now under heavy guard, had arrived at NAS North Island. Engineers immediately began repairs. The damaged vertical stabilizer, rudder, wingtips, flaps, and landing gear were restored. The three-bladed Sumitomo propeller was replaced and the canopy repaired. The aircraft was repainted in U.S. Navy blue-gray over light gull gray and marked with American insignia. The stage was set for its first test flight in American hands. On September 26, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders, one of the Navy's most skilled test pilots, climbed into the cockpit. The Zero, once a fearsome enemy fighter, was now his laboratory. As the aircraft lifted off, Sanders began a series of precise maneuvers designed to reveal every strength and every weakness of the Japanese fighter. What he discovered was invaluable. At low speeds, the Zero was deadly, its agility unmatched. But at speeds above 200 knots, the controls stiffened dramatically. Rolling left was easier than right. Its float-type carburetor caused engine cutouts under negative acceleration, making dives and abrupt maneuvers dangerous. Its construction, incredibly light for speed and agility, meant that even minor structural stress could cause wing failure. The Zero had been a masterpiece of compromise. Speed and maneuverability came at the cost of durability and pilot protection. Every detail was meticulously recorded. Sanders' findings were immediately sent to the Bureau of Aeronautics and shared with Grumman Aircraft Engineering. There, Leroy Grumman and his team used the information to refine the F6F Hellcat design before it entered widespread fleet service. They reinforced armor, improved fuel tank protection, and ensured the aircraft could withstand the stresses that had been lethal to Japanese pilots in the Zero. Test flights continued into October. Lieutenant Melvin C. Boogie Hoffman and other naval pilots conducted mock dogfights, flying American fighters against the Zero to develop realistic combat tactics. They learned critical strategies: avoid turning engagements, exploit the Zero's poor high-speed handling, attack from above, and dive to escape when pursued. These tactics would save countless American lives in the months to come. Even beyond pilot training, the Zero was analyzed in NACA's Langley Research Center, Hampton, Virginia, in 1943. Using the full-scale wind tunnel, engineers confirmed the aircraft's aerodynamic weaknesses, allowing scientists to model and predict its behavior under combat conditions. For the first time, the United States held not just a plane, but a full understanding of its operational limits. The Zero was also showcased publicly at Washington National Airport in 1943 as part of a war booty exhibition. Crowds marveled at the aircraft that had once seemed invincible, unaware that its secrets had already been used to train the very pilots who would dominate the Pacific skies. By late 1942 and early 1943, American pilots had a distinct advantage. Encounters with the Zero were no longer fought blindly. Tactics were informed, precise, and deadly. The captured aircraft had transformed from a war trophy into a teaching tool, directly influencing how battles would be fought over Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, and other critical theaters. One aircraft, one mistake by a young Japanese pilot, had provided the intelligence needed to rewrite air combat in the Pacific. The Zero, which had once symbolized fear and superiority, had become a blueprint for victory. Koga's Zero had passed from a feared weapon into a teacher, guiding American pilots toward tactics that would ensure survival, dominance, and, ultimately, the turn of the war in the Pacific. 1943 to 1944. Pacific Theater, Guadalcanal, and beyond. The capture of Koga's Zero had moved beyond laboratories and test flights. Now its secrets were being applied in combat. American pilots, once terrified of the nimble Mitsubishi A6M Zero, were armed with knowledge. They knew its weaknesses: fragile structure, poor high-speed handling, and susceptibility to negative G maneuvers. What had once seemed unbeatable could now be outmaneuvered with proper tactics. On the battlefields over Guadalcanal, these lessons proved invaluable. Pilots trained on mock dogfights against the captured Zero employed new strategies: attack from above, dive at high speed, and avoid prolonged turning engagements. Japanese pilots, skilled and confident, found themselves suddenly vulnerable. What had once been fearsome became predictable. The F6F Hellcat, designed with intelligence from Koga's Zero, entered widespread service in 1943. Heavily armored, fast in dives, and armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, the Hellcat exploited the weaknesses of the Zero effortlessly. By the end of the war, the Hellcat had achieved a staggering 19-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese fighters, one of the most decisive advantages in aerial warfare history. Psychologically, the impact was just as significant. Allied pilots no longer faced the Zero as an invincible opponent. Confidence returned. American aircrews believed victory was possible, and their tactics reflected precision and understanding rather than fear. The Zero's aura of invincibility was shattered, and that shift in mindset rippled across every carrier deck and airfield in the Pacific. The Zero also influenced training and design far beyond the Hellcat. Pilots of the F4U Corsair and FM Wildcat were taught to exploit similar weaknesses. Engineers refined new aircraft designs to maximize speed, protection, and firepower while minimizing vulnerabilities. Each dogfight, each engagement, increasingly favored the Allies, as the knowledge gained from the captured Zero transformed theory into practical advantage. Yet the Zero itself continued to serve. After extensive testing and evaluation, it became a training aircraft at NAS North Island, helping green pilots prepare for Pacific duty. It remained in active use until February 1945, when a collision with a Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver during taxiing ended its service. Only a wingtip and a few cockpit instruments survived, now preserved at the Navy Museum, Washington, D.C. The story of Koga's Zero illustrates a critical truth of war. Intelligence can be as lethal as bullets. One navigational error, one emergency landing, and one intact aircraft gave the United States a chance to understand, adapt, and dominate. The captured Zero did not just reveal weaknesses in Japanese design, it taught American pilots how to win. Historians consider the recovery and study of Koga's Zero as one of the most significant intelligence coups of World War II. Without it, countless lives may have been lost, and the Pacific Air War might have dragged on with heavier losses. One plane, one mistake, and one opportunity forever changed the skies over the Pacific. Koga's Zero had passed from a feared weapon into a teacher, shaping tactics, aircraft design, and ultimately, the outcome of the war. From Aleutian marshes to Guadalcanal skies, its legacy endured, a silent but decisive contributor to Allied victory.